It's April the 2nd, and today actually marks the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War between Argentina and the UK.
Yeah, on the 2nd of April 1982, Argentine forces invaded the British overseas territory of the Falklands Islands.
Yeah, and we were all trying to think where we were when we heard. And I was saying, even as a working journalist at the time, I'd never heard of the Falkland Islands. And somebody got in touch a while ago and said, just a few minutes ago...
Oh, Michelle.
Said, that's right. She said, I remember the Falklands War. I was at secondary school at the time, and the question from the geography teacher was, does anyone know where the Falkland Islands are? She said Scotland was the most common answer.
Yeah, understandably so. Well,
not further away, though.
Yeah, someone who did know where they were and what was going on was General Lord Richard Dannatt, former Chief of the General Staff, former head of the British Army. Really good to see you this morning, as always. It seems, we're all saying here, it seems remarkable that this was 4 decades ago now.
Well, you're absolutely right. But just getting back to your earlier conversation, in 1982, I was a student at the Army Staff College at Camberley, and someone came into our syndicate discussion room and said the Argentinians have invaded the Falklands. And we all said to each other, where are the Falklands? So we sent someone off to the library to get an atlas, because I'm afraid there was a view. They were off Scotland. But, of course, as we all realised, it was 8,000 miles down there in the South Atlantic. And that kicked off that day, that extraordinary adventure, which sadly led to the loss of 255 British servicemen. But the recovery of the Falkland Islands by the British Armed Forces, quite fantastic feat of military achievement.
And that word fantastic is how I think we all felt at the time. Fearful, I suppose, of what we might find when we got there. But it was a fantastic move to send out this enormous task force all that way. We heard, for the first time we ever heard military terms that you obviously must have known about, like yomping. We'd never heard of the word yomping before. And that's what our troops had to do, landing at one end of the island and yomping until they got there, which was pretty brutal. It was an extraordinary feat, wasn't it?
Well, Royal Marines yomp and paratroopers tab. And they yomped and tabbed their way from San Carlos, where they landed, ultimately all the way through many very gritty battles, till eventually they got to Port Stanley on the 14th of June, and the Argentinians surrendered. Quite an extraordinary set of circumstances. Just a little vignette on the surrender. The General Menendez, who was the Argentinian commander, his military assistant, Lieutenant Colonel, had been at the British Army Staff College the year before. And when he was captured, the officer who captured him, they had a conversation, and the Argentinian officer said, I wish I'd paid more attention last year at Camberley to the general war lessons. Quite extraordinary that we found ourselves fighting the Argentinians when our armed forces actually had been pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's that awful thing about any sort of conflict, though, isn't it? Where, you know, we won, it was something to celebrate, and yet, as you said, we lost 255 lives in 74 days, not to mention all those who were injured, and some of them horrifically, as we know. I mean, there was a big cost to this.
A huge cost. I mean, you're absolutely right. Those physically injured, and tragically, as is always the case, most sadly, those who are mentally injured. And it is a well-established fact now that more than 255 British servicemen have taken their own lives in the 40 years since the end of that conflict. Suicide is an epidemic of our time, particularly amongst young men, both in the civilian world and in the military world. But it is a very sobering thought that too many of the young people that survived that war in the Falklands, for whatever reason, have felt it necessary to take their own lives subsequently. That's another tragedy, compounding the tragedy of the 255 who lost their lives in combat.
And are we learning the lessons of that?
Well, we are. Undoubtedly, more recent experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan have led us to understand much more the importance of mental health and mental health provision. I think the Armed Forces, the Ministry of Defence, the NHS and the military charities are doing much better than they were. Are we doing enough? Probably not. But undoubtedly there is much more help and awareness available. It's needed a culture shift amongst the military. Inevitably, military people, soldiers in particular, are pretty macho and feel they can hack this and they can sort things out on their own. But we're all different with our makeup, our physical makeup and our mental makeup. And for some people, the experiences, the sights, the sounds and the smells that they've been through stick with them and can really affect their mental health. We talk about it much more. There's much more help available. So hopefully the sort of statistics that I was just talking about won't be replicated in the future. But it remains a problem, both in the civilian world and in the military world.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you very briefly. I don't know if you've come across the Head Up charity. Perhaps not, but it's one of the people behind that is Paul Minter, who was a Blues and Royal. And we had him on the show a few weeks ago talking about the number of colleagues and former colleagues who've taken their own lives that he's aware of. And he's currently running the coastline of the UK and Northern Ireland to raise money for building a retreat for veterans and serving soldiers to try and get in the right headspace when they're struggling. It's impressive, isn't it, when people like Paul Minter and others come out of the army, but take on this initiative to help their colleagues and former colleagues?
Well, I really commend that. And a lot of people over the years have done extraordinary things to raise money, to raise awareness. I mean, if you think back, the charity Help for Heroes didn't exist until we founded it on the 1st of October 2007. And it's helped a tremendous number of soldiers, particularly who have suffered in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also going back to help those from the Falklands. And it's an interesting or a sad fact that sometimes it's many, many years after events that people start to suffer in a mental health way. Combat Stress, which is the leading military charity working in the mental health area, say on average it's between 12 and 13 years after someone leaves the service before they actually ask for help. Well, if 12 or 13 years is the average, that means 25, 30 years sometimes for some people before they put their hands up to ask for help. But, if people are suffering, or anyone watching this program is suffering and haven't said anything or haven't asked for help, then please put your hand up. There's no shame in putting your hand up, because all illnesses, whether they're physical or mental, need to be treated, need to be acknowledged and need to be treated. So, well done. That man running the length of the country, or wherever you said he was going, for Heads Up. That's fantastic. But we all can do our bit. It's important that we talk about these things. And
it's very important that somebody like you should say that too.
Yes.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. 40 years
you.
on after the beginning of the Falklands War. My goodness.
Yeah, we really shouldn't underestimate the power to those veterans and serving men and women in our armed forces to hear General Lord Richard Dannatt
say that
is really
important. It's okay
important.
to put your hand up and say, I need help.